good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second edition of our Christmas in July celebrations at Progress, Virginia, celebrating all of the amazing bills that passed the General Assembly this past session that are going into effect, have gone into effect on July 1st. We are very excited to have more amazing policy advances to talk about this morning. So we are going to kick off this morning with our very special guest, Delegate Marcus Simon, who is member of the House of Delegates from the 53rd District and is also the Vice Chair of the House Privileges and Elections Committee, which is the committee in the House of Delegates that considers all of the election-related laws. And we have a bunch of election-related victories to talk about this morning. So welcome, Delegate Simon. How are you?
Good morning, Anna. I'm great. I'm doing very well. I'm enjoying some Christmas in July here, trying to get into the theme of things. And we have some presents there under the tree, which we'll be talking about. So happy to join you guys this morning.
We very much appreciate your Christmas cheer. I couldn't find my Santa hat this morning, so I am sadly visually cheerless. So why don't we dive in? Can you tell us a little bit about some of the amazing policies that you worked really hard to get through House Privileges and Elections this year and have now gone into law?
Sure. Well, as you know, the Democrats took over the Virginia General Assembly this year, both the House and the Senate. And one of the first things that it was important to me that we do, and I've been making this case for some time, was once we take over, the priority one needs to be making voting easier, simpler, and more accessible for everyone, because that's how Democrats will keep our control of the House, not just because it's a partisan thing to do, but it happens to be the right thing to do. And we see this in legislatures when Republicans take over legislatures in other states. The first things they do frequently are to make voting harder. They put up barriers to the ballot box and try to make it more difficult for people to exercise their franchise. So I was very excited this year that we made our House Bill number 1, what we call no excuse absentee voting. So that was HB 1. And that was to send a signal that, again, our top priority was, having secured this electoral victory, was to make access to the ballot box more universal. And it's a big change in the way that Virginia sort of views election day. Up until now, the view of voting has been that you're expected to show up in person, present yourself essentially to the powers that be, prove you are who you say you are, and convince us that we should let you vote on election day. That's sort of been the thinking and the baseline process in Virginia until now. Now we're going to you can vote on election day if you want to, but we also have lots of other ways that you can vote, you can participate. And we want it to be accessible and easy. We want to give you lots of options because voting is really important. We want to encourage everybody to do it. And so first thing we did is that you can vote absentee just because that's your preference. If that's what you want to do, you can do it. You can do it by mail. You can do it in person, showing up at the registrar's office up to 45 days prior to the election. So that's the biggest sort of change that we made, the most important one, I think. But there were a lot of other pieces of that went along with it that we got through. For instance, one of the things that makes people nervous about voting absentee and voting by mail absentee is what happens if my ballot doesn't get counted, shows up a day late? What if the post office messes up? So another really important piece of legislation we said now is that if your ballot is postmarked on or before election day, it'll be counted even if it arrives up to 3 days after election day. So, a couple of years ago, we had a House of Delegates race that was decided by about 30 some votes. And we had about 80 or 90 votes that didn't get counted because they showed up late in the day on election day after the registrar had made their last trip to the post office. So we're trying to eliminate the possibility of things like that happening.
Well, and you all in Virginia were a little ahead of the curve here, right? Because we didn't know that this pandemic was coming, but some of these changes are really helpful for people who are saying safer at home and want to vote by mail and make sure that that ballot is counted this November.
Yeah, and we have a little more work to do on that. We still have some requirements that make it difficult to return your ballot, more difficult than it should be. We're working on some legislation maybe for the special session to really explicitly allow the use of drop boxes like you have in a lot of vote by mail states. Right now, the code says you can present your ballot to the registrar if you don't want to mail it back. But what if I want to bring my wife's ballot with me? There's nothing that clearly says I can bring both our ballots and hand it to the registrar, but the registrar can send me outside, stick it in a mailbox, then it's got to wound its way back to the registrar's office. So we're trying to short circuit some of that. We've also changed the deadline for applying for absentee ballots to try and give, again, some more time for people to make sure their ballots get in and get counted. The other big thing we did is one of the big barriers, one of the things that was created, people don't anymore. Well, let me tell you this, we did finally repeal our poll tax in Virginia. I think a lot of people would be surprised to know that our poll tax was still on the books. It had been struck down as unconstitutional. The Federal Voting Rights Acts prohibited it, but we never bothered to go back and take that off the books in Virginia. We rarely see that kind of in-your-face voter suppression in Virginia, but what we do is you have pretext things like, oh, well, we need to eliminate voter fraud by requiring people to produce a photo ID at the polling place, even though we know that there's very few instances of in-person voter impersonation. It's just not a form of fraud that exists. So we finally this year we didn't eliminate the photo ID requirement, but we said that you have alternatives to presenting a photo ID. So you still have to produce some sort of ID, but we've gone back to what it used to be before the Republicans got very aggressive about this and said you can bring in anything that shows you are who you say you are. And if you don't have anything at all, you can sign an affidavit that says, look, I swear I'm Marcus Simon. I live at wherever I live, and this is my polling place. Let me vote, and under penalty of perjury. So it's giving some people some opportunities to make sure that they vote. Also, make Election Day a state holiday because we had a bill to expand the polling place hours by an extra hour. That's got a reenactment clause on it, so we got to revisit that. But we did say that for state employees and state businesses, it'll be closed down. Schools will be closed, which is where a lot of our polling places are. So made Election Day a state holiday. And again, we did pass a bill to expand the voting hours, but that's going to have to be reenacted next year. So a lot of things to try and make, again, voting easier and more accessible. And then also registration. So getting registered to vote is going to be easier. We're going to have automatic voter registration. So it's an opt-out rather than an opt-in. So if you go to get any kind of government service, register your car, register for any kind of social services, you will be also registered to vote at that new address, unless you say I don't want to, or I'm not qualified to vote. So those are some of the big things that we did this year. We've also improved language accessibility in voting and election materials to make sure that they're put in different languages and they're required to be. Requiring high schools to give students who are 18 and older information on voter registration. A lot of schools do that. A lot of times the League of Women Voters has to ask to get into the schools, but we've tried to make that part of it automatic. If you're denied, if you're trying to register to vote and you're denied, they have to let you know within 5 days. The registrar does that your voter registration was denied, so you don't show up at the polling place thinking that you're registered, and only to find out later that you weren't. So those are the big things that we tried to do, and things we've been trying to do for a long time that we took advantage of this new majority to be able to get through this year.
So you mentioned a couple of things that I want to have you explain a little more. So one is you mentioned a reenactment clause. Do you want to explain what that means for people who maybe aren't versed in General Assembly lingo?
Sure. So basically, it's a soft way of killing a bill, but it says that you've got to pass it again in a later General Assembly session, which means that the issue with expanding the voting hours, I mean, a lot of states have figured out a way to do this. Mm-hmm. The concern is that you've got a chief elections officer who's going to basically show up at 5 in the morning, 4:30 in the morning to start setting up and opening a polling place that opens at 6 a.m. And then if you extend the closing hours till 8, then maybe they're counting ballots until 9 or 10. And that's a really long day for our chiefs. And they have to be there on site the whole day. We don't really have a process yet to rotate and have like these sort of partial staffs. And frequently, frankly, those of you that have been out and taken a look, the people doing the voter registration or the volunteers tend to be older folks. Now, hopefully having Election Day be a holiday so people can take off work and get paid and won't have to go to work will get us a younger demographic that'll be able to show up and volunteer and do that. And we'll figure out ways to get more workers volunteering and to work in shifts. But what the reenactment clause basically means is it passed, we signed it, but it won't become law unless we pass it and sign it again next year, which is kind of the same thing as not passing it, right? I mean, if I don't pass a bill, I can still introduce it again next year and pass it. So that one's hopefully coming down the pipe.
Well, hopefully, and that sounds like one thing that is sort of on deck to keep working on. You also mentioned changes to the photo ID requirement for voters. So can you talk a little bit about what that's going to look like for a voter if they do vote in person this year and they walk into a polling place? Then what should they expect?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One is we added a form of ID too. You know, this idea that, again, the restrictions on the forms of photo ID kind of belied the real reason they were doing it. It wasn't really about trying to verify if the person standing in front of you was who they said they were. Because if that was your goal, then you'd be really take a broad variety of IDs and you'd be very liberal in what you'd allowed to do. But this was to, you know, the law was really about restricting only the right kind of people, or not having the wrong kind of people show up to vote. So we added student IDs for out-of-state universities. So if you happen to go to an out-of-state university, Northern Virginia, a lot of people leave to go all over the country, and then when they come back and vote, you can use your out-of-state photo ID. But if you don't have a photo ID, you know, let's say you are, or if you have a parent who's living with you, who's let their driver's license expire because they aren't mobile anymore and they don't need to drive any longer, they can show up and they can bring a utility bill, let's say. You know, and again, say you have an older parent living with you, so the utilities are in your name, and they don't have a driver's license that's current because they let it lapse, and they don't know what they did with the voter registration card that came in a big stack of junk mail that's sitting somewhere, if it's like my house, somewhere in a stack on one of the tables near the entryway. We can't find it. It was time to vote, right? So now my mom, if she were living with me, she can simply say, I am Susan Simon. I live at this address in Fairfax County, and give me a piece of paper. I will swear to it, right? I will sign an affidavit that says this is who I am. And they can do that now and be allowed to cast their vote. And it's a vote. It's not a provisional vote. They don't have to do it in a green envelope or anything like you used to have to do, right? Up until July 1st of this year, if you didn't have your ID with you, you could cast a ballot. It wouldn't be counted. It would go in a green envelope. It would be sealed up and sent to the registrar's office in Fairfax. And then you had 3 days to show up at the office, even if you lived in McLean or Mount Vernon or Fairfax Station. You had to drive, find your way into the big government center, find the registrar's office, present your ID, and then they would count your vote. And there really was nothing that would have helped somebody in that situation where they couldn't find it. They didn't have it, a current photo ID, and utilities weren't in their name because they weren't paying those bills. So now we've gotten a way for that to work where you literally just sign and say, I swear that's who I am, and they get to vote.
Yeah, and it'll be pretty simple, right? You show up to vote and you either you didn't have a photo ID to begin with, because that's a real thing that I think a lot of people don't realize, or you left your wallet at home and don't have it on you. You can still vote a regular ballot. But the poll worker at your polling place is still going to ask you for an ID. It's just that you can still vote if you don't have it.
Yeah.
And we'll be talking more about this as we get closer to the election. But I think it's important for folks to remember too, that if they have questions about voting or they encounter challenges at their polling places that they're not sure how to navigate, the best resource is always the Nonpartisan Election Protection Hotline, which is at 1-866-OUR-VOTE. And we're just going to keep saying it until you guys remember it. So then no excuse absentee voting is the other really big change this year that we're excited about, which means not only is it easier to vote absentee without having an excuse from the prescribed list, but also that voting for the general election is going to start earlier. It's going to start 45 days before the election this year, so in mid-September. Can you talk a little bit about what that means for voters in terms of access and casting a ballot this year?
Yeah, so we've tried to encourage localities to set up vote centers for in-person absentee balloting starting about 45 days out. So that'll start again in mid-September. It's a couple things. I mean, from the voter professionals' point of view, the voting community, they've got to get ballots together and get everything done a little bit earlier. And that puts some pressure on our flexibility to do some COVID-related things. So our ballots really need to start being printed probably in about a month. They need to start printing the absentee ballots and everything, because in places like Fairfax, where you've got 1.3 million people and several 100,000 voters, it's a lot of printing that gets done. But from a voter's perspective, it means you'll be able to get that absentee ballot by the end of August. and you'll be able to take your time, read through the ballot questions that are going to be on it. In some places, in some localities, you have bond referenda, you have state constitutional amendments, you have local elections happening along with the federal elections. And so I think in Herndon, Virginia, they're talking about having a 3-page ballot to get everything on, which is going to be, so make sure everybody remembers to look at both sides. And in some cases, make sure they get both pages. And they might have to run 2 pieces of paper through the machine. but again, all the more reason to start early, right? And to do this early, to have that ballot mailed to you. So you can request the ballot by mail. You can go online and request that it be mailed to you. I would discourage people from doing the request by mail, because then there's several legs, right? You can mail in a request for an absentee ballot, then have it mailed back to you, and then mail it back in. That's 3 legs of mailing. So you can go online, request your absentee ballot, have it mailed to you, and then you can either take it and present it at a polling place, or you can mail it in. We'll also have places in a lot of localities where you can go, starting at least on the weekends, as far out as the middle of September, and go vote when it suits you, when you're ready to do it. And you don't have to sign an affidavit that swears that I have a sick parent to take care of, or that I have business outside my locality that day. And we can get pretty creative about it. We used to. I represent the city of Falls Church. Like, well, make lunch plans for Fairfax County. You have personal business outside the locality. But there's no playing games like that anymore. Nobody's going to ask you why you need to vote. You'll just go ahead and vote early because that's what works for you. If you're trying to avoid crowds too, I think that's going to be a big motivator for people this November. If you want to do it at a vote center when you have relatively few people around, then you shouldn't have a long line you'll have to wait in. Really, if you go at an off-peak time and there's plenty of space, but if you want to mail it in, then that's even better, right? Safer at home, and you'll be able to get your ballot, take your time, do your research online while you're filling it out, stick it in the mail, and get plenty of time to get it back to us.
And remember, if you do go vote early in person, you still need to wear a mask. But one of the great things about voting absentee by mail is not only can you request your ballot online, but you can also track your ballot online when you log in. So I voted absentee, like a lot of people, for the primary, and I was able to keep watching on the Board of Elections website to make sure that my ballot had been sent to me. And then when I sent it back, to make sure that my registrar had received it and know where it was, so I could really be confident in the process, which I think is really great as well.
And one other thing to point out about that, we still have, so in Virginia, we have a witness requirement for your voting at home absentee. So although you're not going to go present your ID to a election official at the polling place, the idea is to keep people from harvesting these ballots and just filling out a big stack of them. But you have somebody say also, sign off that says, yes, I watched Marcus Simon fill out his ballot, and he is in fact the person that filled out this ballot and put it in the envelope. We got that witness requirement waived during our last primary elections because of the COVID emergency, and we had a lot of people voting by mail that were literally living alone, and for good reason, and wanted to keep it that way. They didn't want to invite somebody in just to fill out this witness requirement. It's not clear whether we'll still have whether we'll have a similar. So what happened with that was waived by a court. A court basically said it can't be enforced. The witness requirement still exists, but if somebody fills out a ballot without a witness signature and mails it in, that ballot still must be counted with or without a witness signature. We try to do some education for folks so they would know they could go ahead and still cast their ballot, even if they didn't have anybody to witness it. It's not clear that the court will give us similar relief for the general election. Unfortunately, the way things are trending in a lot of the parts of the country, we may still be as bad off in November as we have been, but and even frankly, if we did something about this witness requirement legislatively, like I was saying earlier, these ballots and the instructions for filling them out need to be printed probably before we even get back to Richmond for a special session. So also for your viewers, be aware of anybody who's helping people vote by mail, the language will say, do not open this until you're in the presence of a witness. If you can get a witness and you can safely do that from a distance and have somebody witness your ballot, that'd be great. But in Virginia, we don't have true vote by mail yet, although we're getting there. And so we don't have any other way of doing any kind of verification or any kind of backstop to keep, to prevent people from harvesting the ballots. And so the one thing we've got is this witness requirement. So we'll probably still have that. So think about making a plan to vote. Just like you make a plan to vote on election day, think about making a plan to get your absentee ballot signed in a safe way if you have somebody that you can count on to do that for you.
That's a really great point for people to plan ahead for. So I would say democracy is a team sport, and passing good legislation is a team sport. And you have been a fantastic champion on voting rights. But in the spirit of spreading Christmas cheer, who else do we owe thank yous to for their great work this past session and over a lot of years to make all of these policy changes and great voting laws a reality?
Well, I mean, in addition to Progress Virginia, who's been a great ally and advocate in this, New Virginia Majority has been another group that's been fantastic at advocating for these issues in a way that some of the more traditional voting rights groups haven't always. They make sure that their focus is on making voting accessible for new Americans, for people that have been previously maybe convicted of felonies, for people that have lived in disadvantaged communities where there's not a culture that really revolves around registering to vote and voting and voter participation. And they've been great advocates for sort of filling in some of the gaps that aren't always seen or aren't always in our line of sight for those of us in the legislature. Legislatively, I've had some great allies, and the Virginia Legislative Black Caucus also has been a great advocate. Again, a lot of our history of voter suppression in Virginia is about preventing people of color from participating in the process. From our voter registration requirements, it used to be you had to know who the voter registrar was and be able to go to their house to register to vote. And that was the way the registrar kept only the right kind of people voting. Things like our poll tax, which was finally, and literacy tests, which have been repealed from the code. So Legislative Black Caucus, and in particular, I mean, if I'm going to call out some names, that's what you're looking for. My chairman, Joe Lindsay, has been a great, I mean, talk about a night and day difference between, and again, this is why these elections matter and why taking control of a legislature is so important. So the chairman of Privileges and Elections before was a Republican delegate who really was not at all interested in expanding the franchise and was, I don't want to call him paranoid, but he did introduce a piece of legislation to make it illegal to put microchips in human beings because he thought that was coming down the pipe. Which maybe gives you some insight into how he viewed potential voter fraud and conspiracy theories and was very sort of apt to believe all those things. And so we went from that to Joe, who's an attorney in Norfolk who just couldn't be further on the opposite end of that spectrum, looking for every way we can legally, the former judge, to make voting widespread, open, legal, and easy. He sponsored the bill on creating an election day holiday. He sponsored the bill to increase voting hours. And then Delegate Cia Price, who I work with on a lot of things, has been another great ally. She's been on P&E for years and has been really steeped in these issues for a long time. I'm sort of a newcomer to the committee. I was always, for whatever reason, Republicans were punished. They didn't want to give me any substantive committees for a few years. But so I did hop a couple of people in line to become vice chair, but I've worked really well with Joe, with Cia, with Skylar Van Valkenburg on getting a permanent absentee list created. He's a big champion of that, which is really our bridge to vote by mail for those folks that are vote by mail advocates. We want to create a system in Virginia where you say, look, I want to always vote absentee by mail. So always mail me a ballot for every election and don't make me ask every time. And that's how we sort of get to once you get sort of a critical mass of those folks, you really are almost a vote by mail state.
I think one thing that's been really striking to me as somebody who's been doing this work for a lot of years and has spent a lot of hours in P&E committee meetings is the change with the change in leadership this year, and just what a joyous experience to have committee meetings and hearings and conversation be about what is best for voters and how to make voting more accessible and to work for people in their communities is just such an amazing change.
Yeah, and I will say, don't let me get in trouble if I don't also forget to shout out, speaking of leadership, Speaker Fillercorn and our House Majority Leader, Delegate Herring. Delegate Herring was the sponsor of House Bill 1. That was the first bill that went in, and that was a decision that the leadership made at the Speaker, Leader Herring and Chairman Sullivan, we all agreed that we needed to make that House Bill 1, and that commitment really did start at the top, and it's been something that has gone through the entire system and the entire caucus, our side of the aisle at any rate.
Absolutely. Well, and I would also add to that, shouting out Delegate Kathy Tran as well, has done a great job really advocating for language equity in voting as well. And I think the bill that you mentioned earlier about making voter materials accessible in more languages, I think was her bill as well.
Yep, that's right. It's always dangerous to start naming names because you end up forgetting.
We're going to leave a lot of people out unintentionally. So what next? If we are not done, certainly we made a lot of progress this year, but there's a lot of work still to do. So what sort of policy changes are you thinking about for special session or for the regular session next January around voting? What should we be thinking about and paying attention to?
So a couple things. One, we actually did pass, and I didn't mention it because it's not going into effect this year, so I didn't want to get folks too confused, but we did pass same-day voter registration. And that's not going to be in effect for the 2020 election cycle because it's going to be such a busy session. We don't want to introduce something brand new. We're likely to already be really crowded polling places. But I think getting registration easier, making it automatic. We talked a little bit about that, but also allowing for same-day voter registration so people can vote and cast their ballot at the same time at the same place all at once. It's going to be a big thing. I think moving towards a vote by mail or vote at home, we don't call it vote by mail anymore, but vote at home is something that's on the horizon too. We want to expand this idea of voting when it's convenient for you. Voting election day not being just like a one-day, one-place event, but something that takes place over a longer period of time. We've seen great success with that in places like Colorado and Oregon and Washington State. And I think we can emulate some of that. And so we're moving towards, again, permanent lists for in-person absentee. Also getting rid of that witness requirement on the absentee ballot to make it easier for people to vote. It's actually sort of amazing how much we got done in one session. There's not a whole long list of things to do as far as the physical voting process. Now, we saw some campaign finance reform stuff that you and I have been working on for a long time, and for and ethics and transparency things. Some of that did get backburnered this year as we kind of went to the focus on access to the ballot box and getting voting going. So we'll have that some of that to come up next year because again, part of it is helping people make their choice is great, but making sure they can make an informed choice and have all the information they need when they're casting their ballot is going to be an important next step as well.
Well, and all of that is about making sure that we are creating a government that works for everybody in our communities, right? That is advancing policies that demolish white supremacy, that protect Black and brown bodies, and that invest in our communities. And voting is one of the tools that we have in our toolbox to get there. And the more that we invest in expanding our democracy and making it more accessible so that more people can participate and make their voices heard, the more the people in Richmond with you and the policies that you're passing are going to look like the things that we need in our communities to make sure everybody has the opportunity to thrive.
That's right. I mean, as politicians, we react to the people that we think are going to have an opportunity to vote. And so to the extent that we're making it easier for everyone to vote, we have to listen to every voice because they can turn us out if we don't.
That I think is a great point to end our voting conversation on. Thank you so much, Delegate Simon, for joining us this morning and for all of your hard work in Richmond.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for giving me a chance to pull out my Christmas decor here in the middle of the summertime. Maybe forget it's 90 degrees outside.
Merry Christmas in July. So we are going to pivot our conversation now to talk about another one of the really fantastic victories from this past session, which is the passage of the Reproductive Health Protection Act, which is expanding access to abortion in Virginia and repealing lots of bad restrictions that have been on the books. So I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Ashley Crocker, to kick off that conversation.
Hey everyone, we're so excited. We're joined by a lot of really awesome guests who helped us pass the Reproductive Health Protection Act, and we are so excited to learn more about the law and how it's going to impact Virginians all across the Commonwealth. So guys, if you want to turn your cameras on, we'll do a quick round of introductions. And I'll start with you, Ray, since you turned your camera on first. You're on mute though, so take yourself off mute also.
Lucky me. Well, Merry Christmas, everyone. I brought my friend Justin Timberlake to this meeting because who better to talk about reproductive health and justice than Justin Timberlake covered in tinsel. My name is Ray Pickett. I am the communications director for Planned Parenthood Advocates of Virginia. I'm going to sit like this for most of the meeting. And we are really excited to talk about RHPA, and we're really excited to continue the conversation that you were having with Delegate Simon about the amazing things that happened in Virginia this year.
Michelle, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Michelle Woods. I'm the communications director at NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia. I don't have a cool Justin Timberlake background, but I'm excited that Christmas isn't canceled and that we're able to have it together here. NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia is a statewide grassroots policy and advocacy organization. So we helped our amazing partners that you see here pass the Reproductive Health Protection Act this year. So thanks, Ashley.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I'll kick it to Jessica.
Hi, I'm Jessica Shine. I'm the communications director for Whole Woman's Health Alliance. We are a nonprofit organization, and we also have an abortion clinic in Charlottesville. And I'm just thrilled to be celebrating with you guys.
Yeah, and while we're doing introductions, unfortunately, our colleagues at the Latina Institute Virginia weren't able to join us for this live today, but they were also an amazing partner in helping us get this bill passed, and I don't want to leave them out. But let's get into it. Let's go around and tell me what your favorite part of the Reproductive Health Protection Act is. Let's start with you, Michelle.
I have a lot of favorite parts. I would say that, this bill, we've been talking about it as a first step, right? And for me, what that means is we're rolling back common sense restrictions, right? Restrictions that should have never been in place, and restrictions on access to abortion that were designed by anti-abortion politicians when they controlled the General Assembly and had the governor's office in the past decades, and were able to pass these anti-abortion restrictions that again are designed to eliminate access, make it more difficult for people in Virginia to be able to access safe and legal abortion care. And my favorite part is that we're rolling back these common sense restrictions, right? Like we're talking about this bill because it's a first step towards securing a future that safeguards access to abortion care. And because it's a first step, we had to go back and look at the terrible things on the books and get rid of them because they're not based in patient health and safety, and they're not based in science. So I'm just really excited that we can just get rid of what has never been beneficial for patients and start fresh in Virginia.
Yeah, absolutely. That is so right. Jessica, what's your favorite part?
Well, I think there are a number of things, and I think Michelle really, hit the nail on the head. This is a step in the right direction. And I think, one of the greatest things to come out of this is that patients no longer, have to wait. They can make an appointment and receive care on the same day. And I think that is really one major step that this law gives us.
What about you, Ray?
Yeah, I mean, I will say again, there are a lot of favorites, a lot of things to be proud of. For me, I think it is the ability for other clinicians, other advanced practice professionals to be able to provide abortion care, because this is a standard medical procedure that you should be able to receive from any clinician that you know and that you trust. And for many years, there have been nurse practitioners, certified nurse midwives who are very capable and knowledgeable when it comes to abortion care. And we're only unable to provide it because of political interference. And so I think along the lines of being able to put these decisions back in the hands of patients and their clinicians, this is another excellent way to do that. And it expands access, right? Nurse practitioners are seen by folks across the country for a variety of different things. You might see a nurse practitioner when you go in for a sick visit. I know I do. And now you'll be able to go to that nurse practitioner, and that nurse practitioner will be able to provide the full scope of care, as they are trained. So I think it's just really awesome. That's something I know that I'm really excited about. And I know that our patients, or the patients at Planned Parenthood are going to be really grateful for that also.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that my favorite part probably, I mean, you guys highlighted a lot of the really great ones, but for me, I think getting rid of the trap laws and the targeted restrictions on abortion providers that regulate things like the number of parking spaces an abortion clinic has to have, and like the width of the hallways, and all of these crazy things that were just designed to shut down clinics and prevent people from accessing the abortion care that they need, would definitely be my favorite part, because as you guys know, we fought that for a long time. And I am finally glad to be rid of it. So Ray, tell me why this law is so important for Virginians and how it's going to impact regular folks who need abortion care.
Yeah, definitely. I will say one thing that really helps to sort of convey the sense of urgency with this bill, right, is the COVID-19 pandemic, right? We're in a huge healthcare crisis, right, which is now exacerbated. And we're able to see what things are essential, what things are urgent, right? And because of the work that legislators and advocates did in Virginia, we are able to see really what that commitment looks like, right? And what does it look like? It looks like you deciding that you do not want to or cannot continue your pregnancy, and you're able to make that decision in a supported, trusted way that is not simply mandated by the state to infantilize and shame you, right? So if I decide I am pregnant and I don't want to continue my pregnancy for whatever reason, I can pick up the phone and there is not going to be a mandatory 24-hour waiting period, right? So it's really about providing this expanded access, providing support and non-judgmental care to abortion patients, and really, ending the stigma around abortion providers as well. Abortion care providers are clinicians. They are medically trained, board certified clinicians and practitioners. And when we separate healthcare from abortion in our minds, it's much easier to do that in our laws. And I think what the legislators did this year is they rolled that back. They recognized the importance of putting that power back in the hands of patients. And so I think that in addition to all of the expanded access, all of the onerous regulations and barriers that are being removed, it's really the whole of the legislation that is so useful. And I'm sure, my colleagues have similar things that they can discuss about why it's so critical.
Yeah, does anyone want to chime in? Jessica, you took yourself off mute.
Oh, so what, I think really Ray hit the nail on the head. But I also think what this law does is it becomes an area, Virginia becomes an area of hope to the states that we're bordered on, that are seeing a lot of further restrictions on abortion access. And I think it provides some hope that this did not seem possible at one time, and it wasn't that long ago. So I hope that, the states that surround us can actually, the people who want, who need this, can work toward, making this possible.
Absolutely. So Michelle, can you tell us a little bit about the history here? How long have activists been trying to pass this law or a similar law here in Virginia?
Yeah, Ashley, for decades. So you guys probably, Ashley was alluding to the TRAP restrictions, the targeted restrictions against abortion providers. And those unfairly singled out abortion providers and other medical professionals who offer office-based procedures, and they blocked qualified medical professionals from being able to give that abortion care. And I bring that up because that law started in 2011 when we had more health centers providing abortion in Virginia. I think at that time we had a total of 21. And because of these anti-abortion laws that have gone into effect in the past decades, access diminished. And we had at one point 15 clinics coming down from 21 that we had before the targeted restrictions on abortion provider law went into effect. And that made a big impact on people's ability to access care. Accessing abortion care has a lot of different requirements for different people. So, for example, the 24-hour waiting period that the Reproductive Health Protection Act just got rid of and repealed required a patient to go to a health center and then return at a later time with a minimum of 24 hours in between. And that means that patient had to potentially find childcare, as the majority of Americans who access abortion care are already mothers. It means that they had to think about taking time off work and potentially having lost wages, finding transportation needs. So, for over a decade, for when these TRAP laws went into effect, these were just some of the things that people had to consider before seeking access to abortion care. And as was mentioned, for so many people, it just wasn't a reality. Access to abortion care, because of these TRAP laws passed in the past decades, was just out of reach. So now, having a clean slate and trying to, or repealing these laws have put abortion care in reach for more people. And as Ray was talking about, expanding access early in pregnancy for abortion care to nurse practitioners will only expand access for people who need abortion care closer to where they live within their communities. So that's the hope after a long time, I should say, of these restrictions being in place.
Yeah, for sure. So we worked really hard for a very long time when we passed this law. Jessica, can you tell us a little bit about why this law was able to happen this year in 2020 and all that went into that?
Yeah, sure. So there were a lot of moving pieces. And with that comes a lot of persistence. But I would say, a lot of the work was done at the grassroots level and advocacy and educating communities and lawmakers. And there's also a lot of dismantling, the inaccuracies and disinformation that really has been ingrained in public thought for a very long time. So I think, it really becomes the perfect, the perfect recipe to make this action, into law.
Yeah, absolutely. I think between all of our organizations and the hundreds of activists who came to the General Assembly for our lobby days and talking to folks about telling their abortion stories, there's so many different things that go into making this a reality. And we appreciate all the hard work of our organizations and the volunteers who showed up to make this a real thing. Ray, talk to us a little bit about how this law dismantles white supremacy.
Yeah. I think that's a really big question, right? And I think if I was like, well, it dismantles white supremacy in the following ways, it would be incredibly disingenuous, right? We recognize this law as a part of a whole, right? Part of the whole of systemic racism and systemic white supremacy and systems that are confounded in white supremacy, right? Results in these incredible health disparities amongst, and that fall hardest on Black and Brown communities, women, LGBTQ folks, Black trans folks. And these are people and marginalized groups who have built resiliency over decades of fighting these battles, right? They are not new to this fight. And we're able to recognize the hard work being done at these levels, and we're able to use maybe what are broader platforms that we have, right, as organizations built in whiteness, benefiting from white supremacy, as we reckon with those roots in that past and we move forward, we are able to say, you know, we're not here to fix everything. We are here as a partner in the community, building, you know, access to healthcare, building access to broader healthcare. And I think a piece of that is access to abortion. Whenever you tell someone you are not qualified to make your own choices about your healthcare, about your body, about your life, about what kind of medical treatment you receive, when we take those choices away as a governing body, we do a disservice to our own communities, to our entire population, right? So all of this to say, what RHPA does is it plays a small role in helping to remove access to healthcare that everyone should have. And that lack of access is falling disproportionately on Black people, Black women. And in order for us to address all of the inequities that come with this, right? This is one tiny piece and one step forward. I know Michelle and Jessica, you all have really similar experiences talking to patients, talking to advocates, you know, and even, you know, doctors, even clinicians. So.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. And just to add to that, you know, NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia, for example, is a reproductive rights organization, historically white-led, currently white-led. So we know that, like Ray said, it's a small part in the fight for systematic change, and that you cannot have access to reproductive justice without reproductive freedom. So reproductive justice, meaning that a lot of, again, we're a reproductive rights org, and we work closely to lift up the work of reproductive justice orgs. And reproductive justice, meaning that every single person would have the ability to decide if, when, or how to become a parent, and to also decide, you know, if, when, and how they choose to make that decision, to be able to raise that child in a safe and healthy environment. So our piece of work is one piece of the puzzle, but we know that there is so much work to be done, as Ray said, to make sure that we commit to joining the forces of reproductive justice organizations, to Black-led organizations, and make sure that we understand at NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia what issues, what policy issues moving forward we can support those organizations in, and joining forces to dismantle the culture of white supremacy, and continuing to affirm a world where, you know, every single person has the ability to make their own healthcare decisions. So one piece of the puzzle. Thanks for asking that question, Ashley.
Yeah, absolutely. So how does this law impact, I was trying to say two words at one time. How does this law affect everyday Virginians? And I think that's to you, Michelle.
Sure. So I think as Ray and Jessica work in health centers, they could probably expand more on this, but the fact that access is expanded to nurse practitioners being able to perform abortion care early in pregnancy, which also includes medication abortion, there's just a real big opportunity here for people to receive the care closer to their communities and when they need it, without that 24-hour mandatory waiting period, for example. So, and as Jessica was talking about in terms of a safe haven that Virginia is positioned to be now for abortion care, we're seeing just yesterday in Tennessee, if anyone was watching that. We're seeing states neighboring Virginia, so like Tennessee, West Virginia, Kentucky, their anti-abortion led executive branches and general assemblies most of the time are trying to consistently, actively pass bills that ban abortion or chip away at access to abortion care. So all that to say that this law is so important for expanding access to Virginia, but it's also, you know, paving a way to expand access for our neighbors whose rights actively are being threatened year after year, month after month. And, you know, during COVID-19, some of those states took advantage of the pandemic, exploited it, and tried to call abortion care non-essential. Again, you know, it's a timely procedure that people have the right and should have the ability to access. And those politicians in neighboring states and throughout the South made decisions to try and cut off access. So Virginia has a really big role to play. And I'm not sure if Jessica or Ray wants to add to that, or you, Ashley.
I can chime in. You know, I think, you know, patients will no longer have to jump through hoops and undergo burdensome, invasive tests. And really, this opens up the state and, you know, patients seeking abortion care, you know, to, you know, not being burdened and not having to, you know, not having to jump through all of these hoops. So I think that, you know, we're thrilled that this has finally come to fruition.
Yeah, for sure. And on that note, Ray and Jessica, as you guys represent some providers for abortion, can you talk a little bit about how this bill impacts abortion providers and what it means for them?
Sure. So, you know, one of the things that I think we've talked about is, you know, the you know, getting rid of the TRAP laws, which is the targeted regulations of abortion care providers. And I know, Ashley, that you had, you know, discussed about, you know, the regulations being, you know, about the width of the door frames or the number of parking spots. You know, our providers no longer have to be hindered by non-medical regulations. And this gives providers the opportunity to really focus on providing safe, compassionate abortion care for their patients.
Yeah, Ray, did you want to chime in there?
Yeah, for sure. So I will say, we make this sound, we're like, yeah, oh my God, right? This is awesome. I will say to the anti-choice movement, right? Their framing for all of this is, all this legislation does is it makes people seeking abortion care less safe because it removes things like getting an ultrasound, having counseling. That is completely not what this legislation does. What it does is it removes mandated things like an ultrasound, or mandated things like a 24-hour waiting period. What that really means is our clinicians, our front desk staff, right? Planned Parenthood's, you know, work, right? The entire organization is positively impacted because they continue to provide the holistic care for the whole person, whether that is primary care, whether that's behavioral health care and depression and anxiety management, and also abortion care. So I think when we're talking about how it impacts providers in terms of a logistical process, you know, workflow, ease of, you know, ease on the patient, those types of things, this is also like a really big cultural shift. And it really illustrates the desire and the need that abortion providers have had to really make this deeper connection with their patients. Some people may think that, you know, Planned Parenthood is, you know, a one-stop shop. You know, you come to Planned Parenthood for sexual or reproductive health needs, and that's it. But really, this is 2020, and Planned Parenthood is a community partner in ending and putting an end to health disparities. And so this law helps to strengthen these communities. We are proud to be a part of that.
Yeah, for sure. So we all know that while it is super exciting that we've passed the Reproductive Health Protection Act, we are definitely not done in our work of making sure that everybody who wants it has access to abortion care here in Virginia. So tell me, what is next on your Christmas list? What should we ask Santa for this year? And I think I think that's for Michelle. Sorry.
Yeah, great question. So I think I'm glad you asked that, because one thing we didn't talk about is the courts, the Supreme Court. Trump was able to appoint over 200 justices or judges to the federal court, and they are stacked against us. As you guys probably know, the U.S. Supreme Court right now has a leaning conservative anti-abortion majority, and we know that just last week with June Medical Services, that case versus Russo basically was a 5-4 decision that Jessica can talk more about. But at the end of the day, Justice Roberts said, I'm agreeing with precedent here, but I don't agree with the way that Whole Women's Health versus Hellerstedt was decided in 2016, basically all to say, I'm giving anti-abortion activists and politicians the green light for new cases. And that's all to say we have to be on guard and we have to do our work here in Virginia. So our work is far from over, as Ray was saying. This bill is a first step, but in terms of our wish list, we have to really get ready to protect our rights and the ability to access safe legal abortion care here in Virginia for the future, and safeguard that right. And I think that begins with there's a lot of different legislation that we can talk about, and I'm sure will be discussed, but codifying bodily autonomy, right, for those threats at the Supreme Court level that we know will continue to appear. So I hope that in the 2021 General Assembly session, we're able to codify bodily autonomy and safeguard those rights that are being threatened at the Supreme Court level.
Yeah, absolutely. Ray, did you want to add something there?
Yeah, I mean, I think a great wish list would include a lot, actually, a focus in 2020, the rest of this endless year, on pushing for an end to a lot of the federal restrictions that exist. The Hyde Amendment is a really good example. The Hyde Amendment prevents federal funds from going toward abortion care. So again, another talking point on the anti-choice movement is that federal funds go to abortion coverage, and that is not true. And actually, that's a huge problem, because what it does is it further marginalizes Black and brown folks whose health care and health outcomes are often determined by the zip codes in which they live. And it's not only unacceptable, it makes a lot of us really sick when we think about it. And so as we push to normalize and destigmatize abortion care and those who seek it, we also want to destigmatize the ability to fund your abortion coverage. And so I think it's really critical that when we're looking forward, that is a key issue.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to make sure that we mention a bill that we've all worked together on in the last couple of years, the Reproductive Health Equity Act, which does a number of things, but requires that people who are transgender or non-binary can get the abortion care that they need, because I feel like they are often left out of these kinds of conversations. And then it also requires insurance companies to cover abortion care, which is also extremely important, because a lot of people are barred from getting access to abortion because of financial reasons. And we want to do what we can to chip away at that problem as well. All right, well, I think we are almost at time. So thank you guys so much for joining us. I think this was a really awesome conversation, and I really appreciate you guys bringing in your perspectives. Is there any last things you guys wanted to add before we wrap up?
Vote, vote, vote. A lot of the work that we've been talking about would never be possible if folks didn't get out every single election cycle in Virginia, which happens every year. So, and we clearly have a big one coming up. So, you know, don't forget to vote so that all these things can become real. And just to add one more thing, one more issue, combating maternal mortality is also really big. And I know there's just so many issues that apply to health equity that we didn't talk about, but that we hope to discuss. So just wanted to add that too.
Yes, vote, share your story, and don't be ashamed.
For sure. All right. Well, thanks everyone. We really appreciate you joining us and watching on Facebook Live. I hope you enjoyed our Christmas in July celebration, and we will be back on Thursday with our final installment of Christmas in July. And we will talk to you then. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley.
Bye.
Bye.